Hey friend, don't call it a comeback, it's GM Jim from Wizards and Wordslingers. You may already know that I'm not just a game master, I'm also the author of a couple dozen or so thriller novels, some of which have been bestsellers and some of which have won awards. You can learn all about that at jimheskett.com if you want more context, but I'm not trying to brag. The reason I'm telling you this is that we're here today to talk about thriller tropes and how to use them in your D&D or other TTRPG games, and I think my decade plus in the publishing industry qualifies me to do that. First, the word trope has a bad connotation to some people because they think it means cliched, bad, overused. A trope is just a story element that is used often enough and for long enough that it becomes a tradition. And it's how you recognize any genre, by its tropes. A meet cute during the holiday hometown visit, that's a romance trope. Being the chosen one but refusing to believe it, that's a young adult fantasy trope. The hero undertakes a mission only when the villain makes it personal, that's an action trope. There's nothing inherently good or bad about these, they're just story beats, it's what you do with them that makes the difference. So how do you use thriller tropes to plan out your new campaign or fix a troubled ongoing campaign? Let's talk about it. For the following examples, I'll be using thriller tropes as defined by Sean Coyne's excellent handbook, The Story Grid. While this is a book about writing fiction, I think it's still a great resource for game masters. You can pick up a copy at the link down below in the description. I'm also going to give examples from the classic 1980s movie Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's technically more of an action-adventure story than a thriller, but it hits almost all of the same thriller tropes really well. So let's talk about 7 of these and how you can use them to either plan or course correct a campaign for maximum fun. In a way, being a game master makes you the author of the world and the story. You are the arbiter of logic here. And without further ado, here are 7 thriller fiction hacks to steal for your TTRPG campaign. First is the inciting crime. In these sorts of stories, we usually open with a normal slice of life for the protagonist and something happens to upset that. Usually it's a crime or an impending change that threatens to upend normal life. After the cold open jungle action sequence in Raiders, we see Indy being a professor, teaching class, just going about his everyday 9-to-5 existence. Then, 2 Army intelligence officers show up to brief him that the bad guys are excavating an ancient site in Egypt. This is the inciting crime that spurs our hero into action. In your D&D game, how do things usually start? The heroes meet at like a tavern, they sit down at a table and order drinks and a meal. Or they're attending a carnival or some other sort of mundane, regular life thing, then it's often interrupted by a crime or other serious event. Now comes the part where the frantic father bursts into the tavern to say his daughter's been kidnapped by goblins, or the dark wizard's henchmen attack the mayor in broad daylight during the harvest festival. Something visible and obvious usually happens to shock the PCs into action. Of course, the PCs will have their own individual goals and desires, but this inciting crime is the thing that causes the party as a whole to take action. Hey, real quick, since I have you, could I get a like and subscribe below? It only takes a second and it helps us both out. Make sure you click all next to notifications and click the join button to get exclusive perks when you join my channel. Next is the MacGuffin. This is one of those words everyone has heard, but it's not usually explained very well. Put simply, a MacGuffin is an object of desire. These are the diamonds locked in the vault, or the sword lodged in the stone, or the ring that needs to be tossed into the volcano. It can even be a person or persons, like in a kidnapping story. Usually, the hero and the villain both want the MacGuffin for different reasons. In Raiders, after talking to the army officers, Indy figures out that the bad guys must be trying to locate the Ark of the Covenant, an important religious artifact, our MacGuffin. Every single event that happens in this movie after this point is because of the Ark. It's the main thing anyone cares about. Now, in your D&D campaign, you might have a single MacGuffin or you might have several. Think of the vestiges of divergence from Legend of Vox Machina. And whatever it is, or whatever they are, the villain is after it and the heroes will want to keep it out of the villain's hands, or vice versa. MacGuffins are an excellent story device because they give the players something tangible to focus on during the sessions. Remember in Lost, Michael screaming, "Walt!" all the time after his son went missing? You were always clear exactly what Michael's MacGuffin was during those episodes. Third, the stakes become personal. In most thrillers, the hero usually has a good reason to say no when asked to go on the mission or quest. I'm a retired family man now, or I'm injured, or I'm really busy with other stuff. But what happens is an important and emotional justification emerges for the hero to put aside their reservations and undertake the dangerous mission anyway. In Raiders, the army officers don't initially hook Indiana to their cause. He's kind of like, okay, I can see this is bad, but why should I get involved? Then they inform Indy that his old mentor was mentioned in the bad guy's communications. Now Indy has a personal connection to what's going on. In my Crafting Memorable NPCs video, I talked about the importance of making your PCs care about the locals and their plight. So when the party's beloved barkeep friend is attacked, or the beloved local farmer's child is kidnapped, the PCs will be motivated because they'll feel like they have a personal stake in the trouble. Tug on their heartstrings and you make it impossible for them to refuse the call to action. Emotional connections create stakes. It works every time. The ticking clock. Nothing motivates your players like running out of time to accomplish a goal. In Raiders, the ticking clock is sort of implied because the bad guys are rushing to find the Ark, so Indy has to locate it before they do. This is more of a variable ticking clock because there's not a specific countdown. Sometimes it's a literal ticking clock like a bomb. Or in werewolf stories, you always know the next full moon is coming up. In your D&D game, you can use ticking clocks to motivate your players like, in a month, the lethally rushing river will recede low enough that the bad guys' armies can cross and begin their invasion. Or, the planets are going to align in 10 days so the evil magic ritual can then begin. I would just advise caution using too many ticking clocks or clocks that are too restrictive because some players can feel like they're being railroaded if they're always being rushed to do the next thing. Give them time and space to breathe and pursue their own goals as necessary. Some players might think they don't have enough time to take a long rest because of that brewing volcano. And it's okay sometimes to, above table, just let them off the hook and say, no, it's fine, you can long rest. I think back to my first playthrough of Baldur's Gate 3, I rushed because every NPC I talked to said that the tadpole in my head would kill me soon, and so I had to hurry to find a cure. Turns out, in BG3 you have plenty of time to pursue whatever side quests you want, and I wish the game would have broken the fourth wall to tell me that. But when you're running a TTRPG game, you can. That's one of the beautiful things about our hobby. These next two hacks are usually paired together. First, speech in praise of the villain. In most thrillers, there comes a point where the villain reveals their master plan. This is usually done to help the audience appreciate the power of the villain and the gravity of the situation. It's also a great way to recap events up to this point. It's important for players to see the villain and especially to see examples of villainous schemes. The speech in praise is a great way to do this. In Raiders, this is accomplished through bits and pieces of conversation throughout, and I suggest you do the same in your D&D campaign. Yes, you can drop your BBEG in front of your players, and Curse of Strahd does this well. But I suggest you also use NPCs to pass along the important exposition about the BBEG. NPCs should regale the party with stories about the villain via rumors and innuendo to illustrate the villain's plan and might. You don't have to physically put the villain in front of your party to communicate their dastardly ferocity, but you can. Then, hero at the mercy of the villain. In most thrillers, there comes a scene where the hero ends up shackled and imprisoned at the hands of the villain with the odds severely stacked against them. This is also a good time to unfurl the speech in praise of the villain when the heroes are helpless. This happens multiple times during Raiders. And think of every James Bond movie where he's chained up while the villain monologues about his brilliant plan. For you see, Mr. Bond, you are too late. My ingenious masterwork is already in motion and cannot be halted now. Does this work in D&D? I think it can. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to literally shackle your PCs and put them in an inescapable dungeon. We don't want to rob player agency here. Being at the mercy of the villain could be a Dark Knight type scene where the villain appears and says, I put two beloved NPCs in separate peril and you only have time to save one. Now the PCs can still take action, but the villain has demonstrated their power and ruthlessness by forcing the party to make that choice. And finally, the false ending. In most thrillers, there are two endings, or sometimes more than two. It's hard to give examples here without major spoilers, but think about it. You've seen those movies where the villain is buried under a pile of rubble or falls into a vat of lava, only to surprisingly claw their way back out or up just as the hero starts to celebrate. This can work in a campaign where it turns out the BBEG was actually just a puppet of the real villain, or the boss has a cleric pop out and revive them just in time. But be careful with this, because some players will feel you're stealing their agency and nullifying their hard work by bringing back that villain they just killed. But on occasion, this can be a fun twist to throw at them. So there you have it, 7 thriller tropes and how you can use them to spice up your tabletop role-playing campaign. My name is GM Jim Heskett. Now go forth and run thrilling games.